Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for September 2nd, 2024. This week we're going to be looking at the potential to bring down the fools-based order. Not rules-based order, which doesn't exist, but the order which is being run by suicidal fools who think they can control the outcome of the battles going on around the world, where nations are asserting their sovereignty, are moving away from the control of NATO, and as a result, we face a very serious crisis, a very serious dilemma. Now, what I'm going to report to you today is a kind of a survey overall of where we stand as the establishment is running out of ideas and is moving closer and closer to triggering a World War III which would go nuclear if they're not stopped. Now let's start with a not unexpected shock from yesterday, the vote in two German states, Thuringia and Saxony. What was the result of these votes was a complete repudiation of the existing coalition government of the Social Democrats of Scholz, the Green Party, and the neoliberal Free Democrats. In Thuringia, the Alternative for Deutschland, which is rejected by the media and the mainstream in Germany as a right-wing extremist party, received 33% of the vote and finished first. The Sarah Wagenknecht group, which is a breakaway from the left party, they ran third, with 15% of the vote. So you had the two leading anti-war parties getting almost 50% of the vote there. Then in Saxony, the Alternative for Deutschland was neck and neck with the Christian Democrats at about 34% each. What's crucial is that the Greens and the Free Democrats, leading supporters of the war and the Scholz policy of the Social Democrats, were voted out of the parliaments. They didn't even reach 5%. Scholz's party barely was in single digits. And so this is a shocking, it's not so shocking, people knew it was coming, but it's something that will have reverberations not only in Germany, but worldwide. Now, the leading issues were the opposition to the Ukraine war, that Germany is completely subordinate to NATO and to the Western alliance, and that the policies of the economy are for guns, not butter, and the green transformation, which is rejected by a majority of the population. Now, what heightened this opposition was that Scholz submitted to the demand from the United States to accept the placement of long-range nuclear-capable missiles in Germany to target Russia. And Scholz did this without consultation with allies, without consultation in the Bundestag, the German parliament, just submitted, as he did when Biden told him he was going to not allow the Nord Stream pipelines to exist. Scholz submitted. And this is not the way a chancellor of a sovereign state should behave. And the reason for putting these missiles in Germany is as part of an escalation against Russia, which includes the British and others pushing for the missiles and weapons being provided by the West to allow Ukraine to use them to strike inside Russia. Now, what makes this more ominous was the report in the New York Times on August 20th by David Sanger called Biden Approved Secret Nuclear Strategy Refocusing on the Chinese Threat. Now, this was not necessarily a big change in U.S. policy, but what it called for is preparing for a coordinated nuclear confrontation against Russia, China, and North Korea. And Helga Zepp-LaRouche addressed this at the International Peace Coalition meeting last Friday. She referred to an article written by Ted Postel, a very well-known expert on nuclear affairs. And what Postel said is that this is something which represents a significant change. Now, Helge said, well, this is a top secret doctrine. No electronic copies supposedly exist, only very few printed ones for very classified people. Nevertheless, it talks about the U.S. preparing to fight a nuclear war on 3 fronts. And then she goes on to say what Postal wrote in an article in Responsible Statecraft. He said, this is not at all about a slight modernization, but a dramatic stepping up of the capabilities to fight and win a nuclear war with both China and Russia. And what Helge then concluded is it leaves Russian and Chinese leaders no choice but to take countermeasures which will increase the already dangerously high readiness of their nuclear forces, and it will force them to increase their worst-case planning, and in this way increase the chance of a nuclear response to a false warning of attack. Now, that's what should be discussed. But here's a question for you. Has any media asked Kamala Harris about this? This is her policy. This is Biden's policy, which she has not repudiated. Now, Russia said they will introduce a correction in their nuclear strategy to address this. Thus, we're moving closer to a nuclear war provoked by the United States. And this question of will anyone ask Harris about it is crucial, because voices must be heard on this. So let's step back a second and look at the broader picture in which this is a leading component. The U.S. nuclear policy and the continuing arming of Ukraine and the NATO involvement in the proxy war against Russia, so it's ceasing to be a proxy war but an actual war, the intention is to destroy Russia. It never had anything to do with helping the people of Ukraine. Secondly, Ukraine's desperate thrust into Russia, into Kursk, well, NATO was behind it. Zelensky is the puppet. And the intention, as we said from the beginning, was to weaken or destroy or break apart Russia. Point number 3, in Germany, there's a revolt against the government, which is a revolt against the subordination of the national interest to the lunatic drive from the US and the UK and NATO for global dictatorship. Point number 4, what about France, the other power in Europe? Well, Macron still has no government, and he just announced that he's going to be meeting with former presidents Sarkozy and Hollande, but he's leaning toward a regime of technocratic experts, such as the Davos City of London crowd. The question is, who are these experts? And if they're so expert, why have they so fouled up the economies and the strategic policies for Europe? Then we look at Israel, where there are mass demonstrations against Netanyahu, triggered by the murder of 6 of the hostages. Now, Netanyahu's trying to say this is all about Hamas, but the people in Israel know better. And they're turning out in the streets because they know Netanyahu is refusing to end this war, refusing to get a ceasefire agreement and a deal for the hostages, because he sees this as his only way of staying in power. There's a general strike that will probably be called by the Histadrut, the Labor Federation, and this is going to raise one danger point, which is, under pressure, will Netanyahu expand the war? That's the way he tends to operate. That's his pattern. And the only way that will stop is if the U.S. says no, which unfortunately none of the candidates, neither Harris nor Trump, show any willingness to tell the Israelis to stop it, or there'll be no more weapons and money. Now then we also have the 6th point, a U.S. banking crisis emerging, especially with regional and smaller banks. With the collapse of the commercial real estate markets, what's going to happen with interest rates lowered? Well, it's going to possibly trigger a new inflation, and it's nothing but an election ploy. And it will add to the $34+ trillion in debt. So the final point is, the voices of reason must be heard. There are some people speaking out competently. The International Peace Coalition that has now met for 66 straight weeks under the direction of Helge Zeppler-Roush and the Schiller Institute is having prominent people come out and join us. people like Lawrence Wilkerson, Ray McGovern, Scott Ritter, representatives from Israel, including a leader of the former Peace Now movement. So we're gathering steam on this precisely as the potential for a break with the unipolar order is escalating in the global south with, there's a China-Africa forum underway right now. The African nations are welcoming the Russians and the Chinese. The Indians are active, the Brazilians are active. And the only way this can be suppressed, they think, is through censorship and stupefying the people in the West. Now, also, let me just point out that in their endorsements of Trump for president, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard both warned of the increasing danger of nuclear war. Now, the point is, in the face of this strategic situation, and it's very fast-moving, shocks almost every day, but we cannot give in to our fears. You can't bury your head. You can't sink into the couch and say, what's on television tonight? It's time for people to speak out and join us in bringing down the fools-based order. We must win this fight, and we can win it. But we need you to speak out, you to join us, subscribe to our publications, and become a part of the movement to bring down the unipolar world, which is propelling us toward the end of civilization.